Great. Okay, welcome all. I hope you're able to settle in and have a conversation with us here for the next 90 minutes about your sustainability as a center, what you're facing, what you're doing about it, what your experience has been with resources that you've received from RCC and from others. We're going to have a conversation here with two retreat center leaders who can speak about their experience, and then open that up to a larger conversation for folks who attended today. I wanted to share a couple slides myself. Sharing slides is a fun thing that I don't do very often, but I thought this was a good opportunity to, at the beginning of some of our calls, just reiterate some of how RCC holds spaces like this. So to remind folks of our core values, which we feel are essential and really apply across so many of our retreat center spaces and places, whether they're urban or rural, whether they're from a specific tradition or outside of a tradition. We value the power of place and space, the interplay of inner and outer work, and have a commitment to universal flourishing, which shows up in a lot of different ways. It could be around equity and justice. It could also be around environmental care and stewardship, allowing everything to flourish and finding ways to ensure that that happens. I also felt like some of our calls, it's easy for us to know how the space is being held, but there are some unspoken agreements that I feel like I know, and I feel like our culture has really sustained in these community calls, but I thought I'd just mention them verbally for folks who are not familiar with this space. We encourage folks to speak from their own experience. I want you to know that your voice and your story are important. We're here to learn as peers. So we're all knowers and we're all learners. So whatever your experience is important for the rest of us to know about as well. Silence can be centering. I think there's been some amazing experiences in these spaces with just going quiet together for a while and then seeing what emerges from silence together. Encourage folks to keep other stories confidential, but share what you learn in these conversations in our community calls. And we invite you to participate as you're able. So if you need to pop off, if you want to just leave a note in the chat and then come back when you're able to, that's up to you. We just encourage you to participate as you're able. Encourage you to hold discomfort with grace and deep listening. Sometimes these conversations bring up real complexity in our spaces, in our work life, in our personal lives. We're not here to fix each other, but we are here to be with each other and hear each other out. And then this phrase that came up in a racial healing workshop a year or two ago, choice is the smallest unit of liberation. So some of that invitational stance is just, if you have choices, and even if they're the tiniest choices, that's one step toward liberation, that you can choose how you want to show up. You can choose what you want to share or not share. And we encourage you to make those choices in a way that works for you and that works for the rest of the group. I will jump over to my notes here. I also wanted to just spend a moment here to speak to the moment we're in terms of just coming off of Indigenous Peoples Day and the celebration of the healing that is needed for Indigenous people everywhere who have been separated from land, and also coming off of 2 consecutive Jewish holidays and this new war in Israel and the pain and suffering of all the people who are separated from land or have a very complex, difficult relationship with land. And just the grief that goes along with watching this and holding this from a distance here in the US, and knowing that we have people in our community who have friends and family in Israel, in the Middle East. So I would love to take a moment of silence to recognize that weight that's in the room with us, and that applies to all of our sustainability and healing as these important retreat spaces. I'm here in Baltimore. I'm about to meet up with a group of Jewish retreat centers called Retreat Jewish, 10 or 12 retreat centers. And they sent on a note this morning about the importance of retreat centers in times like this, for times like this. So just want to reiterate to you all how important your work is in times like this for community building and peace building. So let's take a moment of silence. I'm going to mute myself, and I'll give you a verbal ding when we return. I'm in the airport, so I don't have a bell with me, but I'll give you a ding here in a moment. Peace, peace. Thank you. Yeah. I'd like to pivot us back to the moment here to our guest facilitators who are going to be holding this conversation. So grateful to Cathy Stackpole and Mohan Aguirre, who are going to be talking with us about their experience. Cathy, I have down that I would invite you to speak first. Does that feel comfortable to you?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, great. If you could introduce yourself a little and just share
Sure.
some of why you're here and why you chose to join. I would love to hear from both of you about that.
Yeah, so my name is Cathy Stackpole, and I am an executive director of Ferry Beach Retreat and Conference Center, and we are on the beach in Saco, Maine. We're about 90 minutes north of Boston. We have occupied this space since 1901, so we're about 122, 123 years old. We started, as many retreat centers in Maine do, as a facility or a retreat space for religious groups. Happened to be universalism, God is love, everyone's going to heaven, that kind of energy. So we've maintained that energy in our mission statement as awakening and embracing universal love, but we have been a separate 501c3 since 1936. We still have an affiliation, not an affiliation, a connection with a lot of UU congregations when Universalism merged with Unitarianism. Although I have to say the Universalist vibe is much more pagan, much more connected to the earth. And many people who have been longtime Universalists say that the Unitarians are going to kill the movement because they don't tithe and they don't give and they don't connect in a way that Universalists do. So Universalism wasn't a religion, so it was just a movement. And I particularly like that energy, especially in times now when we're struggling. And thanks, Ben, for talking about that, because I felt like when we first came on that, and now we're really fortunate in a lot of ways to be land-based and connected, but I really feel like the world is calling us to do something greater with all of the spaces that we have. And exactly what that is, maybe it is what we're doing right now, but maybe it's more than that, to think through ways we can really be contributing into the greater challenges our worlds are experiencing, even if it's just to be a retreat space for people taking a rest from the world that they are working and living in. So we have about 32 acres on the beach. We have a campground, and we also have 19 buildings, which is always challenging to keep up with because of Maine's salty sea air and fog, salty fog. that takes off roofs and takes siding and things like that. So, we're constantly looking at facilities issues and that dreaded deferred maintenance list of things that we have to get to. I came here 12 years ago. I've mostly had a career in the not-for-profit area. I was CEO for a couple of battered women's shelters, started my work in the battered women's movement a long time ago, before there were laws and rules and money. And so worked in Kansas City there for a long time, and then was a consultant, an adjunct professor, and then went back to being a CEO of a Girl Scout council for a number of years before I came to Ferry Beach. I grew up in New Jersey and was in Oklahoma by that time, and had to get out of that red state. Sorry for anybody who's living in Oklahoma now or another red state. So one of the things that when I came here, we had this huge list of deferred maintenance, and we also were spending money that was in the future, money that was deposits for the next conferences and the next thing that we were doing. So we were always going to be behind ourselves. And what I kept saying is, we have to stop spending in the future and just pay for the now. And so finally got our board to kind of get on board with those ideas, and stopped spending money that we didn't have, but at the same time continuing to put money into the properties, because the properties really needed a lot of help. And so I was looking for, we had a long-term relationship with an ecology school that took over after we spent most of the summers. We did about 95 days of summer, and then they would take over and be a part of the facility for the rest of the time. And we would have weekends during the week stuff, and them doing their work. They were not paying attention to the property or caring about it. And when I finally looked at paper and pencil, what is that? What is happening here? They were giving us about 9% of our income and taking about 79% of the time we can be open. So that meant that we had to start looking at how could we address capacity in a new way. So the timeliness of the work that the students did around, is there a formula to be able to kind of start asking the question or answering the question of how much space should we be always renting out or doing programming? We have our own programming, plus we're also renting space to other groups that have to fit with our mission in order for us to have them stay. But trying to find that right sense of capacity. What's the formula for capacity? And I truly believe the group of students and the questions and then the spreadsheet helps, but it doesn't really get at all of the different nuances that Ferry Beach has. We have properties that range from more premium facilities with their own bathroom and cabins, to things that are in a dorm room, to our tent sites. So there would be a lot of nuance that we would have to create in that formula, but it does start to get us to where we need to be, and putting everything in graphs of how much you're spending. I think for most of us, probably staffing is a huge part of what we spend money on. At least I know from my experience in not-for-profits, that's a lot of what we need to spend money on. So anyway, we made this decision to go to a long-term year-round facility. We had been sort of that way, but really committing to it. Ended the relationship with the ecology school. And in March 2020, we had a full book of business. And you all know what happened then. And so we had money in the bank, we had staffing, we were ready. We'd really thought through all of it. And then we ended up using that saved money to get us through the pandemic. And so now we're coming back around to trying to get to that place of how do we grow, and what should we let go of? There are conferences that come that are maybe only a couple of people, 10 people. Should we keep them? Should we let go of them? We have a big dining room that fits 150 people. Do we open it for a period of time for 10 people or 60 people, or where's that cutoff? Thinking about those kind of questions. So using the tool and trying to tweak the tool is where I am right now, is trying to tweak the tool to help me think about the ways to do this. We've learned that our shift to year round is a good idea, but as I said, there's seasonal quirks for us in Maine, particularly snow, and we always have to have a rain date or a snow date actually for us, because only where our premium spaces are winterized, and one of our dorms that has a big auditorium and 4 breakout spaces is warm, but the rest of it is not. So thinking about how do we do that we can't be full capacity like we can in the shoulder season and in the summer. So we're trying to figure that out and wondering, from other groups, like what's the industry standard in retreat space for occupancy? I looked at the hotel occupancy is like, I think they shut down a hotel if it doesn't do like 85 to 90%. But what's a facility? What's our kind of place? What is the industry standard for occupancy? And then for us, other questions are, is there a sweet spot to this September to May conference? Do we shut down for a period of time? We know other retreat centers that take the whole month of December off. Do we do something like that? We're just figuring out, do we turn away some business? Do we turn away like one-offs, just somebody that's just coming for a day or just a day and an overnight? We've been working on professionalizing our board, and we had a conversation yesterday kind of thinking about, how do we maintain the energy of our legacy while also moving to a professional kind of organization with a board that focuses on policy governance instead of a board that helps be the operations when we need them to. And we've mostly, since I've been here, we had summer staff that stayed here and lived here. They were mostly kids who had grown up in Ferry Beach and come to conferences or mostly to youth camp. But there were, 20 kids, and I was, dealing with a lot of drunk kids and a lot of alcohol and drug abuse, and they were staying in property. And then I started realizing that with the Fair Labor Standards Act, that we really shouldn't be giving them a stipend and trading for room and board for the summer, because that worked out to be, I don't know, way less than minimum wage. So all these questions, and of course our legacy volunteers and staff and members would love for us to go back to that model, but I found that I was just babysitting that model, and I really don't want to do that. So thinking through, how do we pay people a living wage, and how do we also take care of the facility and the property? So those were the questions that having that model come to us helped me think about. So I don't know if there's time for questions, or what's the best thing to do here, Ben?
Thank you so much, Cathy. Already there's so much depth to how we can talk about this. So thanks for sharing your center's unique context. I think we could do questions now, but I think I'd rather hear from Mohan so we can see kind of the diversity of experiences and sites, and then hold some questions, because all of our centers are so different. But if folks do have questions they're thinking now and you want to pop them in the chat, it's always so helpful to see how other people are thinking. And I would love to have sort of a collection going there so that we can come back to it. But I would like to move over to Mohan and hear from you about what's happening at Mount Madonna.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate the opportunity. And I think in what I share, you'll hear many common things with what Cathy just shared. But my name is Mohan Aguirre. I'm both the Chief Financial Officer and also the Board Treasurer at Mount Madonna Center. I like to say I'm trying to fill big shoes, and we just happen to have Rajendra from Mount Madonna Center on the line as well. So he held this role for, I don't know, 20 to 30 years, so quite a long time. And we have a couple of other folks from our community on the line as well. I guess first what I'll share is a little bit about my own background. I had the good life fortune to grow up at Mount Madonna Center. I arrived with two of my brothers and my dad when I was about 11 years old. So that was 1987. So it's played just an instrumental role in my life. It's inspired my work since then, which was going in a career of international relations, where I was the CEO of a marine conservation nonprofit for about 17 years. And it was around 2020, I think, that I recognized the need and importance of coming home to Mount Madonna Center. I heard the call of the community, you know, the proverbial mythical call to help support this home in a time of need. So that's really I and some of our other second generation folks are doing. So that's my introduction, but I actually prepared some nice pictures and a little bit of information for you all. So I'll share that. So at our heart, we are, let's see, actually, do I have one more slide? Yeah. So this is a picture of our campus. So we're in the Santa Cruz Mountains overlooking the Monterey Bay on one side, and then Silicon Valley on the other side. So we're about an hour and a half south of San Francisco. We have and steward 380 acres of what is the traditional homeland of the Ohlone people. It's open, rolling meadows and redwood forest primarily. And at our heart, we are a community of practice. So we are a spiritual community. We have about 80 or so residential community folks. Both our founding generation, staff and volunteers, and then some families as well. And our outward facing mission is that we hold space for personal transformation through community of practice, stewardship of sacred land, preservation of wisdom, and lifelong learning. Mount Madonna exists to support and foster peace in the world. And I think there's a couple of folks, you may not be muted, but if you can, that would be helpful. And we were inspired by the teachings, practice, and presence of Baba Haridas. So he was a master yogi who came over from India in the early 70s. And if you're familiar with the book, Be Here Now by Ram Dass, that's where he was first introduced to the West. And he was Ram Dass's first yoga teacher. And he was the first yoga teacher of many. So I'll get into the specifics a little bit about our organization. So we are a conference and retreat center. I'll go over some of our facilities. So we both host our own retreats and programs, and then also those of outside presenters. And historically, we have a pretty thriving conference and retreat business to what we do. We're also the home of Mount Madonna Institute, which is an accredited institute of higher learning, where we have degree and credential programs in yoga and Ayurveda. Here's some of the nuts and bolts around our capacity. I know people are probably interested in this. So we have 52 total rooms, which have 116 total beds. We also, because we have a large campus, we have about 73 campsites. And then we break down those totals into a couple of our main facilities. Interestingly, you can see we have 52 rooms with 116 beds. That means there's often 2 to 3 folks, the capacity for 2 to 3 people in each room. But our private bathroom capacity is pretty limited. And in this day and age, people want more and more of their own private bathroom. So that's been presenting a challenge for us. In addition to all of that, we also have a fully consecrated Hanuman temple. So this is both a revered place for our own community, but we're situated close to Silicon Valley. And so each year we have, I'm going to say tens of thousands, but maybe it's somewhere 10 to 20,000 of pilgrims, devotees, and visitors come to visit the temple. And last but not least, we also have a preschool through 12th grade school. This was one of our very first projects. At the founding of the center, we also founded a school. So this is a different angle view of our campus. There's the upper campus and lower campus. And then far, far off in the distance is the Monterey and Carmel area. So it's a pretty majestic location, I gotta say. This is kind of a classic summer day where the coastal fog comes in just to the bottom of the hill, and it's a blanket of fog out as far as the eye can see. So some of our strengths, like I've said, we have a nearly 50-year track record. We steward this beautiful land. We have some great facilities, both for meeting, teaching space, and our residential community. We have dedicated master teachers, another 2 of whom are on the line here today. Our succession is underway, meaning that our founders, elders, next generation, and newcomers are all working together. We have one of our newer community members, Peter, is on the line, who works in our community and well-being area. So we've brought in new skills coupled with wisdom and experience of those who have come since the beginning. Our challenges are several. So we no longer have the physical presence of our teacher, Baba Haridas. He continues to be an inspiration, but his physical presence and just the opportunity to spend time with him brought in thousands and thousands of people over the years that were really inspired to volunteer and to help build the center, build our ashram and orphanage project in India, and various other projects. And while our generational transition is underway, it continues to be challenging. Our elders and founders continue to play really instrumental roles, often for limited or no pay. And so a couple bullets down, we're in this transition, or have really made the transition from volunteer to a paid staffing model. So I think you heard that in what Cathy had to share as well. The 2 years of COVID closure did not help. So it was a trifecta of challenges, these top 3 bullets, any one of which would present an existential challenge to a retreat center. We had all 3 at the same time. We're also working just to evolve, so moving towards more transparent and inclusive decision-making, coupled with empowered leadership. And so that's a really interesting balance to find. If you, it's very easy, I think, not easy, consensus-based decision-making, while it has its strength, that can also be really challenging. And sometimes you need clear lines of authority and empowered leadership. So we're trying to find that balance. We're modernizing our organizational structure and systems, top to bottom. The deferred maintenance on our vast campus is a challenge. Each month, some new pressing need will pop up. And then on the climate risk, you saw all the forest around us. we're especially prone to wildfire danger. And out in the West and in California in particular, it's incredibly difficult now to get fire insurance. So we've had to take matters into our own hands and do a lot of prevention and fuel reduction and things like that. So in terms of the numbers and the case study that the Cal Poly students produced on all of our behalf, here's a snapshot of our revenue. So our first year that I'm tracking here is 21-22. So this is just beginning the recovery of from COVID. And so generating $665,000 in program revenue was actually a big deal for us. It means we kind of got the diesel engine moving again. This last year, which we just ended on September 30th, we were able to double our program revenue. And our goal for this now current fiscal year is to double it once again. So we're very much in our recovery, and I can share some of the strategies that we're pursuing. I think that's the headline on this slide. Let's just see. Yeah. And then on the expense side, probably the most notable number here is personnel expense. And Cathy spoke to this as well. As I said, our personnel expense has traditionally been very low. One of our core values and practices is volunteership, or karma yoga, which is the yoga of action. Service without expectation or attachment to rewards, which has been beautiful. It's served us incredibly well, but in a new regulatory labor climate with an area of incredibly high cost of living, we've had to evolve that. And so you can see this large increase in personnel expense. And in the coming year, we will continue to add positions, maybe another $500,000 to $600,000 in personnel expense. So what all this adds up to is in 21-22, we had a deficit of about $717,000. We're expecting to bring that down to about $600,000. And you can see the reduction in our total reserves. So we have been really fortunate through strong financial management throughout our history to have had reserves to help ease the revenue crash that COVID created. So this is actually a pretty bold strategy. It has been around investment and some necessary spending. So our strategies were first to stabilize our finances. I think the tool, the sustainability calculator that the students created probably would have been really helpful for us if it had come out about a year or two earlier. Myself and our finance team went about some of that work ourselves. While we had really strong financial systems overall, incredibly detailed accounting, our traditional method had not been one of budget setting and budget tracking. And so that was a mechanism that I introduced the last couple of years. And it was especially important to also develop a multi-year projection, because in the short term, our spending strategy around stabilizing our finances and especially building operational capacity was pretty scary, in that it was increasing our deficit in a time of uncertainty. And so by having a multi-year financial projection, we're able to show the trajectory that we expect to go on. And that storytelling element, I think, has been really important for buy-in, to build confidence. And now we can track ourselves against it. And we can show that we're actually a bit ahead of schedule there. And then just wrapping up, we've also been finding the balance between a very rich foundation and spiritual tradition, and also the need for innovation. What kind of new approaches and programs can we develop? How can we build our network of collaborators? Being with you all today is one step in that direction. I'm a big believer in these kinds of networks. And then also remembering, meaning, as I shared, there's many different aspects of our organization, from a children's school, an institute, the center, the community, the temple, an orphanage, sister community in British Columbia. In some ways, we have operated independently, but we no longer have that luxury. To be effective and to sustain what is most dear to us, we really need to work as one organization. So that's a critical approach that we've been following. And then maybe most important is the conservation and transfer of wisdom and our historical practice. This was the inspiration for our community and what we have to offer to the broader world. And what's the best way to do that? What is the most important to conserve? And there's probably many communities on the line that are asking those questions of themselves, especially as the time passes from the physical presence of our teacher. How do we hold those practices and teachings ourselves and share them with the next generation? My two kids go to the school, and so that's always on my mind as well. So I think that's everything I have. Look forward to the discussion, and hopefully both Cathy and I seeded some rich territory to explore with you all.
So yeah, let's open it up. Thank you so much, Mohan. I appreciate that. And the slides were great to see the images of the space and to think about the budget in more detail. What questions are bubbling up for folks? I'm happy to get some conversation going here in the broader group.
See Margaret.
Just to ask, Mohan, I put it in the chat, what were the sources? You had a pretty substantial other revenue sources. What might some of those be? Look pretty healthy.
Yeah, the biggest number which we received 21, 22, I don't remember if we received it in 22, 23, was the employee retention tax credit. So that was a federal COVID relief package. We received about $350,000 from that. And then also our temple receives substantial donations, and some of that money goes to covering our operational costs for grounds and upkeep and staff. So those were the biggest, and then some guests will just come and stay for a night and pay for meals and things like that. So I think that was the third component there.
Relative to the tax credit, had you been part of the PPP loan program?
I believe the school received the PPP, and the center maybe just a small grant, I guess you would call it. But we were also in this process of transitioning from volunteer to paid staff. So we didn't actually have a lot of paid staff cost or expense on our books. So there wasn't a lot that we could ask for the PPP.
Well, the retention tax credits, I looked at that they have kept coming with promises of, whatever, if you applied for it, but I was advised that it was so much, there was a lot of heavy lifting relative to the PPP loans and getting them turned into actual grants at the end. A ton of paperwork, and it seemed from our point of view that the retention credit may take that and just as much, and all these organizations promising to help would take a little cut as they work them through. So I don't know what other people experienced with that. It would be good to hear. I didn't pursue it, but
The Mount Madonna School received just the last few weeks 717,000 from PPP. That was an incredible lifting job. It was endless bureaucracy and daily, sometimes multiple calls per day. And there just wasn't the bureaucracy to catch the requests. So you just had to keep banging on the door. But $700,000 is a significant contribution to keeping our school operating.
thank you.
I see your hand there, Cathy.
Yeah, so we had PPP loans and also the employee retention credit. The PPP was quite easy actually, because we had a good relationship with our banker. And that might be something, I'm sure most of you have some relationship with the banks that you have. So that helped. And then our employee retention credit was just, it wasn't a lot of paperwork that our bookkeeper couldn't handle. So we were able to get, I don't know, total maybe 300,000 over that second year. I think the first year the PPP loan was 100 something, but they were both very helpful to us, and it really wasn't that much of a deal. I would definitely go along with what you just said, that there are a lot of vendors out there who want to help you and then take a percentage. I don't think you need them.
Yeah, Sarah Lynn.
I was just going to agree about if you're getting emails about the ERC still. I know I got like a gazillion of them, people wanting to help us with them. But we also found that our bookkeeper could do it, and we've received all of ours now. And it was a fairly substantial amount of money. So if anybody hasn't processed them and they think they might be eligible, be good to have whoever's doing your accounting or financials anyway to take a look, because it could make a big difference. Of course, it's too late for PPP loans, but we also benefited from our relationship with our bank. And so since we don't really know if anything else could happen in the future, if you don't have someone on your team who has a good banking relationship, it might be a good idea to, just have a visit with them and develop that a little bit in case something new happens in the future. Because for us, when the application and some of the follow-up was getting cumbersome, we would just reach out to them, and they really helped walk us through it. So.
One thing that I showed was this increase in our program revenue. It might be helpful to unpack that a little bit. Some of the strategies have been just looking at our pricing, our historical pricing. I felt like we hadn't kept up with the market, that we were actually underpricing our meals and accommodations. And despite some of those beautiful facilities, we actually weren't charging daily rates for those meeting spaces. So those have all been either instituted or adjusted, and the philosophy is one of a sliding scale, where we want to retain accessibility for those of more limited financial resources, but at the higher end, price and charge those folks, meaning companies, organizations, foundations, institutions at the highest end that have the ability to pay. And then we tier our pricing in between those two groups, depending on the nature of the entity that's coming. That has felt more, not only more equitable, but some of those larger organizations haven't really batted an eye, like the NYU Bernstein of Institute of Human Rights is coming in a week or two. They have the resources of New York University, behind them. But we also have more social environmental justice organizations, and that's pretty critical to our values to be able to have access there. We're seeing the need to do more fundraising. We've always had kind of pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, self-fund ethic, which has served us well. But we also feel like we're a place that people want to give to financially in more substantial ways than they have in the past. So there's a need to diversify in that way. And then creating some new programs like day visits and kind of packages around wellness and healing and Ayurvedic treatments. So those are some of the ways that we've been able to increase our overall revenue foundation.
Sarah Lynn, did you have more you wanted to share? I saw your hand was still up. Okay. I wonder if some of what you're talking about, Mohan, leads us to that conversation around unrelated business income and the 501c3 status and like who all you can serve and how you stay within your mission. Can we talk about that a little bit too?
I will give it a shot. Rajendra really is the expert in this area, but I am learning and also engage with our attorney quite often. What is critical is that we stay within the bounds of our articles of incorporation and our IRS determination. We've intentionally defined those with some latitude. So meaning organized for the purposes of religious, spiritual, charitable, and educational programs. So the groups that come need to fit into one of those categories, and their work needs to be tied to around wellness, spiritual practice, wisdom transference, those sorts of things. We do have some aspects of our operation where we have to track closely unrelated business income, and that is a really important tax consideration. But we feel like we're very much operating within those legal guidelines. Rajendra, did I miss anything there, or can you correct me?
I think you caught the primary thing. It was interesting. A number of years ago, we had an audit by the IRS, and they were specifically looking at programs and their applicability to our charter. And through our ignorance, we had reported some of that income as rental income, which it really wasn't. And as soon as we clarified that with the IRS, they went through our brochure and certified our programs that we had as being nonprofit acceptable and not unrelated business income.
Yeah, this organization had in 1936 lost their 501c3 status because they listed lodging as lodging instead of talking about it in a relationship and package to the conferencing that the conference was doing. And then we know of another facility up in Bangor, Maine that was doing a lot of weddings, and we're not declaring those as unrelated business income to their mission because their mission was a conference center. And so they had a lot of back taxes to pay. And so instead they ended up dissolving and creating a small foundation for groups in Bangor, but they lost their 501c3 status over that.
Just relative to cost analysis and reporting and so forth, we were advised at one point by our auditors to be careful that the food costs and that which you track to food production or meal production be at a break even or loss, because if you started showing income over what your costs were, it looked like you had some unrelated business income. I argued that how would you ever bring people to a center and not feed them as part of what you're doing? And why would you want to suffer a loss over that when you have to stay in business? So it was, fortunately, I wasn't arguing it with the IRS, but it struck me that meal cost ought to be automatically part of what allow us to do our program. So these things get pretty tricky to keep track of and follow.
Yeah, I think so. We have a little store, and in the summertime we sell ice cream, and we build into the price that we pay that tax. So it all comes onto a square that helps us, because we know any income coming from the square is going to be taxable. And that I just think we're all needing to think about that, especially, I said to Ben yesterday, as we move as a country more to the right, I think they're going to be looking for ways to go after very more left-leaning, not-for-profit organizations. And so I think it's important that we all pay attention to that stuff.
I'm curious if folks remember back to the Cal Poly case study and some of the strategies that they suggested there. Have folks employed any of those strategies, or did you have thoughts on whether how applicable they are to your center? What have you all been trying?
I can step in. Sorry, I joined a bit late, so sorry about the step in late. Sasha from Mount Madonna Center here, just outside of Penticton, British Columbia. The big change. My background was in a not-for-profit, Hostling International. So when I came to the church-affiliated retreat center, learning about charitable status and permissible revenue has been sort of chief of mind. So we really, I'm not sure how parallel the U.S. regulations are and versus Canada, but the spare capacity clause has really been critical for us to be able to generate additional revenue. So we've commercialized our campgrounds and some of our indoor accommodations, which has brought in significant, about $150,000 of new revenue. And we've had this vetted by our lawyers to ensure that if indeed we're not hiring additional staff or allocating additional resources, and that this is genuinely spare capacity, then we are within CRA, Canadian Revenue Agency's regulations, to sell that spare capacity at market value. And that is permissible. Now, if it turns out that were to become a significant portion of our activities, it'd be a hard case to make that our full staffing structure and facilities are still in service of our charitable programming. But I would say that really understanding that spare capacity element and how it applies in the States has really helped us kind of clear the road for increased revenue generation. It also has really helped our efforts to bring new people into the center to discover our charitable programming. And one of the measures of success we're looking at is, I wouldn't want to use the word conversion, but to bring people that are newcomers that find the center because of accommodation and campgrounds, and then discover our charitable programming. And we'll be tracking that over future years.
That's great. we had used to call all of those people vacationers, and I'm like, we can't be calling them vacationers. We got to be calling them like personal retreatants. And I see a lot of websites that people are saying that, and I think that's important, just the language. So good for you that you've been able to do that. Are there other people who've been able to think of other ways to build revenue?
One of the things that we've just been careful to do is to really note on our contracts a really extensive list of all the amenities that we can provide and make sure that there's pricing related to them. And one of the things that we recognized several years ago that we were doing, and now we've finally really gotten better at it, is not giving things away for free when people aren't asking us for it. So we learned a lot about not devaluing ourselves and not making assumptions about what people wanted or what they expected. So when I first came to Guest House, which is about 9 years ago, if someone came for a tour, we were just like automatically telling them that we would give them free teachers' rooms. And then next thing you know, they're bringing 4, 5, 6 teachers to an event for 70 people, and we're giving away all this free revenue. And what we found is when we didn't mention it, 99% of people never asked for it. So we were just giving it away unnecessarily. So sometimes finding new revenue is simply about don't give it away. Some groups need projectors, some don't. And rather than just saying, oh, we include a projector in every meeting room, those that need it and use it do pay us for it. And we did not get, surprisingly, our staff was so worried that we were going to lose business, we were going to get pushback, people were going to be upset with us, and none of that happened. It was all just like in the approach to it. So the approach is really important, but I would just suggest, if people haven't already done it, to take a really good look at what are you including? And do you need to include it? Why are you including it? Are they expecting it? Because most people, if they do want something for free or they want a little more added in there, they'll ask, and then you can negotiate rather than just making the assumption that if we don't do this, we won't get their business. Because since we did that, our business has actually grown substantially. And I think a lot of it is from the value. And I find that a lot of staff, even really good experienced salespeople, will approach things from their own budget mindset. Like they always feeling like, we got to give them such a deal because otherwise they're not going to come or something. And it seems to come from a place of a scarcity mindset rather than an abundance mindset where, if people do need a discount, or they need some particular thing that maybe their group can't afford, we're willing to talk about that. Just don't give it away.
Right.
So I hope that's helpful to people, because it has made a huge difference for us in that other income category. Yeah.
Sasha, I had a follow-up question for you. Was there a distinction between I forget the term you use, excess capacity versus unbooked capacity? Like you truly have capacity that you just don't need, and that's why you're able to then commercialize it?
Yeah, as I understand it, that's one and the same, right? So what we do is we fill up our program calendar. We open registration to program participants with a 6-week lead. We've learned that 80% of our registrants will register within the 6 weeks that a program opens. And then we open up everything else as excess or spare capacity.
Yeah. That makes sense. Thanks.
I have a question for the group, if that's all right. One of these questions is on our books, how we track retreat revenue versus other revenue or spare capacity. Really trying to discern where that alignment to charitable purposes is. If a group decides to host an event at our retreat center, whether we call that a value aligned or mission aligned retreat versus a third party rental, and just some experiences or some discernment that you have as to who's making that decision. How do you decide whether a group is actually in delivery of your mission or purposes or just a third party rental?
I could speak to that a little bit. For us, if it's a social event, such as a wedding, which we do very few of, a retirement party, maybe sometimes we do very small wedding receptions. Something that's a social event is that's outside, the mission. That is not like that's not transformative work. And so that's how we monitor it. And it's our salesperson that makes that choice of how it's going to be tracked. And because our mission is fairly broad, one of the things she also does when she gets an inquiry, before she even gets past like some basic information with them, she always reviews their website, asks for background information about what their retreat's going to be about, what are they going to be doing here. And that usually, helps her to sum it up pretty quickly. So, yeah, the other thing you can look at too is who's sponsoring the event. That might sometimes make a difference. Like we have one group that comes here that's it's a support group for families with hemophilia, but it's paid for by a pharmaceutical company. And so that one was like, it took us a while to decide whether it's like it's in mission because it's something that people need support with and so forth. But the fact that it's paid for, by a pharmaceutical company left us feeling a little off, so we decided to count that one as out of mission. But, sometimes it's just a discretionary thing and it's hard to know, but we mostly think of, how's it going to pass the test of our audit? Is an auditor is not going to want to count, a retirement party as, in mission. But yeah, some of them are borderline, right?
Just speaking from personal experience, not working at a retreat center, but booking a retreat and leading a retreat at a retreat center, I had to fill out a form where I had to answer questions about how my programming was going to line up with their mission. And there were, I think, three questions. Do any of you institute something like that where you're sort of allowing the facilitator to check themselves against your mission as they're applying?
You've just implemented that on all group bookings now. So we do have a little checkbox for any group books. Say, are you religious, spiritual, educational? Do you check any of these boxes? Yeah, it's critical if we're going to report the income properly.
Good idea.
Although this
go ahead.
exactly, oh, sorry, Cathy.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Although this isn't exactly with hosted groups, we have a similar situation with our bookstore because we have an on-site bookstore. And I was asked one year by our auditors, so how exactly is it that your bookstore is not unrelated business income? Well, it was clear to me that because everything on our shelves pretty much is a reflection of the programs that we offer, with very, very, very few exceptions. It was easy to make a case that this is core to our mission, is providing resources, whether those resources are skills that happen in our meeting rooms or if they're books that are purchased in the bookstore. But that is kind of a little bit of a litmus test whenever somebody asks me, do you think we could carry such and such in the bookstore? It's easy to come back to that. How core is this to our mission to be able to answer those questions?
it's very nuanced too, if the IRS wants to go that deep, and I guess they could. Yeah.
Might it also be, what proportion is it of your income? I mean, if it's not a highly significant amount, it may not draw that kind of attention.
Yeah, is it a bookstore with a retreat center attached, or a retreat center with a bookstore attached?
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a community center in Mid-Coast, Maine, that's a Jewish community center that has a skating rink, an ice skating rink. And they just lost a couple of years ago by that they were not counting that as unrelated business income. And they were renting it out to groups like the Boys and Girls Club and, you know, other kid groups, and they lost in court. And so I just think it's out there, you know, it's a shame. The other thing I was going to ask about is, I wonder if people are dealing with any of the cities or towns doing payment in lieu of taxes. There are a number of, they usually target universities, but we've had our small city has struggled financially, and so it's all supposed to be voluntary, but they are asking us to give them our lodging numbers so that they can assess a fee on us for what's called payment in lieu of taxes, a pilot program. I wonder if anyone has experienced that. Not yet.
Is this in difference to like a hotel tax? Is that?
It's because they can't tax us because we're not for profits. And so like they do it to colleges, and like Boston University has an agreement with the city of Boston that, you know, you're going to provide some fire and police department efforts on our campus. And so therefore we're going to assess you X number of dollars. And it's supposed to be that the not-for-profit voluntarily says, sure, we'll give you 10,000 or 20,000 or whatever, like we want to do that. But small cities are now looking at it as a way of and they don't, I don't think, have anything to enforce it, but they do ask.
When Guest House was founded 15 years ago, we came to an agreement with the town. There were so many townspeople that were really upset that the building that we purchased, which had been an inn and a restaurant, they were just so upset that there wasn't going to be that type of business here anymore. And then, of course, the town hall was very upset because we were going to be a not-for-profit. And so we came to an agreement with them based on what the board of directors felt was sort of an integrity issue, that even though we are not-for-profit and we don't have to pay that tax, that we are going to be using their roads. All of our guests use their roads. We're going to periodically need fire. The fire marshal has to come here to do inspections, and as well as occasionally we need an ambulance. And so we worked with them on what, you know, we felt was going to be a fair agreement. And so as much as we don't want to pay those tax, I think it is important for not-for-profits to think about the fact that even though we're a not-for-profit, our mission shouldn't create a burden on a municipality. You know, we shouldn't be accepting things for free that are costing the town, you know. So that's how we, you know, came to it. But I hadn't heard about towns like sort of voluntarily, you know, asking people to voluntarily give something. But I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see more of that, because so many towns are struggling. They're just not getting the funding that they used to, and expenses are going up. So that's interesting.
I have another question, if I can. Just since I joined late, I might have missed some good stuff. One of the options that we looked into was actually incorporating a for-profit business that would be wholly owned, subsidiary of the charity. Has anyone else gone down that route or down that road? Take that as a resounding no.
Hi, Sasha. This is Danya from Bethlehem. Sorry, I'm just joining now. Just came out of some meetings. It is something we're exploring, and it's interesting because I recently met someone you and I have in common, so might be something we could connect about and talk more offside. It's not anywhere in the realm yet, but something we have looked into, especially with what is happening in Canada with B Corps as well.
Thank you. Just for those of us who have significant land assets, and as we look, and we can't sustain necessarily the maintenance and upkeep of those assets through charitable purposes alone. Spare capacity can only get us so far. If we do run up to that point where we're earning as much from spare capacity as we are from our charitable purposes, there comes a certain point where incorporating a for-profit business is the cleanest way to do it.
I would love to talk about that more in future conversations. I'm very curious about what all that entails. Margaret, I see your hand is up there.
I just thought this is not a follow-on to anything that anyone has brought up, but I wanted people to know that my congregation has made a decision to put our center up for sale. We will be operating as we have for 53 years as a center, and through 24, we have begun to promote our center for sale, hoping that someone will. Certainly, we're in San Rafael, about 25 miles north of San Francisco, a beautiful area, accessible by airport connections and so forth. But again, looking at the limits of our capacity to carry on, I know other groups have faced into this question, and what we're looking at is the limits of our own ability to continue to staff such the facility, and looking to folks who may have ideas for how this could be appealing long-term and do other programming than we have done. It's been it's a hard decision. It will be a hard loss for us. But I was thinking of, as people ask different questions, one of the things that we've really worked hard in balancing, we have a lot of hosting of other groups we do. Our criteria really is, are they in alignment with, generally speaking, our contemplative approach, so that we balance and keep that energy. We're one building as a facility, so it isn't like we have multiple outbuildings or we have a little over 2 acres. So it's both a big decision for us, and we're rebuilding our business from COVID. I mean, we have contracts through 24. And all the things that everyone's mentioned is struggling with, we're struggling with those and trying to work through the questions, and have done a lot of financial projections and analysis. I did, first 15 years out, then 10 years out, and 5 years out. Now you can think about, well, maybe 2 to 3 years out, what's it look like? So our whole world frame of reference has shifted so radically. You use something that you learned in the past, but boy, you have to be very agile for the future. So.
I'm sorry to hear the news, Margaret. It's been on my heart since I read the newspaper article. So you've been in my thoughts.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
Certainly, if anyone is aware of groups looking for property, we had a community of people inquire, and I presume they're pursuing it if they think it's worth their pursuit. But I'd be happy to hear from anyone who, and send them to the right connection if there was interest. And I don't know, Ben, if it would be useful to send our packet to you and have it be shared, if that's of any use.
I would love that if you have it available. I've sent a note out to maybe 10 or 15 people that have talked to me at various points about being interested in a center. I didn't send it out to the whole listserv in quite that same way. I guess it was in the most recent newsletter, just a kind of a moment of noticing that centers are going through hard times and some are choosing to sell.
Yeah.
So
Religious congregations of women are facing their own internal challenges and have developed some spectacular places. So it's really how to reverence what's been and be sure that the resource can be made available. You opened with the concern around Israel and Palestine. People at every juncture are looking for sanctuaries, for solace, for places of refuge. And as we face a world in shambles, these places of respite and recovery are going to be really critical. But it needs the energy of someone new to actually carry on, and people who can, I think, deal with a lot more diverse psychological needs as well as spiritual needs. So I'll be happy to share that, Ben, and then stay in touch with you.
great. Thank you, Margaret. And thank you for what you just said. That's really key. Yeah.
So Ben, I was thinking one of the topics that people had talked about was, those government programs. And I know I had reached out to other not-for-profit organizations that I knew that could help me at the time. But I wonder if that's something that RCC could put on their list of things to do when things like that come up, because I think it is helpful that there is some place where people can get, and maybe you did do that.
Yeah,
aware
you're
of
talking
it.
about the PPP and the ERT.
And the ERC, yeah.
Yes, we did. We have, well, I think I took it off the website by now because the PPP was over, but we had several calls
That's
about
great.
it. We had some folks on helping you walk through some of the decisions needed to get yourself signed up. And that felt like a really important way that RCC could serve at that point in the pandemic and
Yeah.
kind of learn from each other along the way. At this juncture, it's been harder to know where to serve as centers face so many different kinds of situations. So a call like this is really helpful to see that, as folks have mentioned in the comments, that actually we are in quite similar spaces in some ways. The challenges we face are similar. There's the deferred
Right.
maintenance, there's the staffing and the ideas around the edges of what's available to to make a profit on that's still within the mission. I think there's still a lot more to talk about here.
Yeah, definitely. We've been doing some things around combining efforts with cooks and dining hall staff. That's a huge one. And the groups that I've been talking to, and I see some head nodding, that's been, such a challenge. And we've even thought about, who do we know that we could meet with in the, they're open and when we're not open or not as full, and trade staff, that people could have a year-round job, but have sometimes in our winter, they're going south to work, that kind of thing, because it's very difficult. We've really struggled with staffing.
Cathy, when you were talking about, you raised a question about, what you were looking at taking day groups and the profitability and the question of costs and so forth. We just, very early, it became apparent to me when I first came on as director here, that it took as much to do a day group sometimes or an overnight group as it took to do a 3 or 4 or 5 day retreat.
Agreed.
And
Yep.
the trade-offs are terrible
Yeah.
because you're running your staff in circles.
Yep. I
So
agree.
he-
I'd interviewed a guy for hospitality, and that's what he said. He said, I would turn down a $50,000 wedding if you had somebody who's coming back year after year for 4 or 5 days.
Because there's so much that it taxes everybody to the max to
Yeah.
do it. And then you're left exhausted and you still have another group coming in and the trade-offs are really dicey.
Yeah.
And, what we did, and I think what I is try to balance what the staff could do for upkeep and work at some of those deferred projects when we didn't have, if you have a day group in, their attention has to be on the people. But if you have a span of 2 or 3 days, you can get some things done. So it's really managing those things very tightly because that does have impact on resources.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we even had a couple of no food moratoriums, where we just said, okay, the dining hall isn't going to be open for these 2 days because otherwise I can't give these people a break and they can't catch their breath. So yeah, I totally agree with you. And it's finding that sweet spot. And then of course it's also when you're the one who's looking at the revenue and trying to figure out, okay, how can we do this, to turn down something that's just a day, but in the long run, it's the smartest thing to do.
So one thing that I'll add, Margaret, your sentiments around our places of being of refuge, self-reflection, giving organizations the opportunity to do the work that's needed, I completely resonate with, and that's only going to increase in the future. So I think we are all, to varying degrees, kind of navigating a pretty difficult stretch, and hopefully folks are feeling like you're starting to turn the corner. And just as we are becoming more disciplined in our financial analysis and decision making, many companies and industries are changing as well, and they are actually valuing compassion in the workplace, mindfulness, the value of nature, and giving their employees and staff the opportunity to unwind and deepen their relationships. So I feel like we're actually moving more towards each other in that way, and that'll create opportunities for both sides. So, and we have been attracting a fairly narrow segment of presenters, really tied to yoga retreats and wisdom traditions and things like that. And that's great. That has been our basis. But by opening our message and our channel a bit more, we think that we'll find mission-aligned companies that value what we have to provide. And that, I think, is going to unlock some financial opportunity as well. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, it sounds like there's been some amazing conversation, and I was curious. I'm not sure if pricing strategy was a part of the discussion, but Cathy and Mohan, just coming back to what you were saying, like one of the things when we did our analysis this year to really start to understand our occupancy, we not only built into our occupancy rate the number of days that we need for turnover, we actually built in what I call the resiliency factor, which is, Cathy, it really speaks to what you're talking about. And so helping the board and stakeholders to understand the impacts of something. I always make the joke, it sounds like it's just a snack tea and cookies, but the impact on the team is great. It,
Mhm.
you know, it's so much more than that. And they do such an amazing job at making it look seamless and all the things, but we're all of our resilience is worn, and it has to be. So now I have 2 different occupancy rates, and one actually factors that in and shows the number of days in the year we actually can run. And certainly aiming to build our capacity, but right now that's like 82% is our 100% right now, if I factor in all those things. And it's made a big difference to then helping from a revenue perspective to say, okay, so if we're only relying on program, you know, that then that's actually not possible this year. We need to fundraise X. And, you know, just shifting some of that back to the work of the board and the support we need to bolster through this storm.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think we're done. You know, oh, COVID's over. I don't think so. And I think the impact of it is, you know, in food pricing and being able to get commodities of different kinds. It's amazing. And of course, staffing. You know, we're looking at most of our usual people who can work weekends, mostly young kids, you know, high school kids who just cover, you know, the dining room and stuff, that they're not there. And the J1s we had 10 J1s, and they didn't want to work. They were all tied to their phones, and they wanted to sit down, and they're like, hey, get up. You know, this is important. You got to do this. And so we realized, you know, we had our own usual orientation, and that wasn't enough. So we're going to have to think about what we say, and then how we vet people going forward. We were spoiled. We had a couple of wonderful high school students who actually stayed with us through their college years, and we lost them this year. It was sort of just the cycle of things, and that really hurt us. So
I see that we are at time, and I am so grateful for all the ways that this conversation went. And I just tried to keep muting myself and let it keep going, because there's a lot that was shared here, many new ideas for me that I'm hoping we can circle back to. Some ideas here that I want to bring to the annual retreat in a couple weeks to folks who will be there, and hopefully we can get some more learning there. And I'm imagining right now that we should do another call specifically around program pricing. I feel like there's something there that we could go a little deeper on. I tried to do that a couple of years ago, and maybe we didn't have enough grounding, but I think we have it now. So look for that in the next few months here. We don't have another community call this month, so we'll be at the annual retreat. Erin and I thought about doing a live stream on Facebook, and maybe we'll still do that if we have good enough Wi-Fi, but we're going to be skipping the community call in favor of the on-site in-person relationships. So we'll be excited to share that back with you when we see you next, second Tuesday in November. Wonderful to see you all. Feel free to unmute and give your thanks to our presenters.
Thank you.
Thanks to
Everyone.
Cathy and Mohan. Thank you.
Thank you.